Are you ready? Okay, here we go. Hello everyone, this is Paulino from the Language Learning Summit. We are about to start a live panel, and I want all of you watching live to let us know if you can hear. We're just going to have a quick hello from the panelists here. Rita, if you can say hello.
Hello.
Mariana.
Hi there.
Tetsu.
Bonjour.
Fabrice.
Bonjour.
Bill.
Bonjour, привет.
Oh, great. Many languages here. So this is our panel coming up. We just did a quick audio test and we'll be right back. If you have any questions, you can start posting in the chat. See you soon. And we are back for real this time. This is the Language Learning Summit. My name is Paulino, and I'm just here to introduce this fantastic panel with our host, Tetsu Young, raising multilingual children from home to school and back. So Tetsu, please take it away.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Paulino, also. It is a tremendous honor for me to host this and moderate this fantastic panel on raising multilingual children. But before anything, thank you, Paulino, once again, for giving us this opportunity to give a presentation on our talks, on what we do. And we do have different aspects, and we have a fantastic lineup of panelists. So I'm going to introduce them very quickly, like, just a one-line, two-line thing before I give each panelist an opportunity to talk about their work and what they do. All right. So first panelist I have, his name is Fabrice Jaumont. He's an international educator and the author of a popular book called The Bilingual Revolution. The future of education is in 2 languages. The second panelist we have, her name is Rita Rosenbach, and she is a family language coach and the author of Bringing Up a Bilingual Child. So she runs a very popular website called Multilingual Parenting, and she regularly holds Facebook live Q&A sessions on the topic of raising multilingual children. So the third panelist I have is Mariana Dubosc, and she is foremost a bilingual mother, she says, and a former educator, lifetime language learner, and she is the host of the Bilingual Avenue podcast. And she does these podcasts to guide parents on what to do in the face of raising bilingual, possibly multilingual children. And then we have William Rivers. Dr. Rivers advocates language learning at the national level. He is the executive director of the Joint National Committee of Languages. And finally, I complete the list. I won't be talking too much, I hope. We have so many fantastic panelists. But myself, I raise multilingual children. I have 3, so 5-year-old, 4-year-old, 3-year-old, and I raise them in 5 languages at home. So it's really in the home base. And I have a little book called Hampers to Polyglots, 7 Ideas for Raising Multilingual Children. And I have a side gig. I organize a Langfest in Montreal. So these are the things that I do. But I'll let each panelist go into each of their work in more detail as we do the panel. First thing, let me do an icebreaker question. I will just name each panelist randomly. So let's discuss first why we raise multilingual children and when do we really start doing this seriously. So let me start with Fabrice. Maybe you can take it away.
Yeah. I know I have 2 girls, 4 and 8, And my wife is French. We both wanted them to, keep speaking French and English. We live in Brooklyn, and for us it was key and a key motivator. And we wanted them to also attend a dual language program in a public school where they do French and English 50% of the time. But all this to say that as heritage language families, we are very, very convinced that speaking two languages or more is essential today.
Fantastic. So next, how about we go to Rita? Tell us a little bit about why you raised multilingual children, when you started.
I was raised bilingual myself from when I was small. Actually, well, it became 3 languages when I went to school because our dialect was so different from the Swedish I learned at home. And then my mother was Finnish speaking, and then I learned so-called proper Swedish, Finland Swedish, at school. Fast forward 20 years or a bit more, and I found the father of my 2 now adult daughters on the other side of the world. And for us, it was natural that they would grow up to speak both families' languages. I express it as such as I had the privilege to choose who I had my children with, and with that privilege also came the responsibility in my mind to make sure that my daughters grew up learning both families' languages, because that's the way into the culture and into the heritage for sure. I'm now already a proud grandmother of a little 2-year-old who is born here in England. I live in England since 20 years, about this year, yeah. And my daughter actually is passing on Swedish to him, so we are continuing the line of Swedish also here in the UK. So we are hoping to see it continue into the future.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So let's go to Bill.
Yeah, so it's the stories are going to have some similarities. I think that, again, growing up hearing French at home from my father, Quebecois French, which was beaten out of me when I got to school in America. I was taught proper hexagonal French, and I've mostly forgotten how to saclise and all of that. And then learning Russian in school and living abroad, and marrying a woman who's Armenian American, speaks Armenian at home, and also learned Spanish, and then working in language, right? So this is what I do. It would be, to me, it's almost like if you're an accountant and you don't want to teach your kids math, right? It's just, in some ways, it's almost an unexamined assumption. Of course, we're going to speak multiple languages. That sets aside all of the cognitive and educational benefits and societal benefits that derive for the kids. But there are challenges, right? We're going to get into some of those, I'm sure. That of course they're going to learn languages. And I have a 14-year-old son, almost 15, and a 6, now almost 7-year-old daughter. The challenge, the first challenge I put out there, because I'm sure we're going to return to it, when the kids get to be about as tall as their mother, they get to be adolescents, and say, I don't want to do Armenian anymore. I want to do Spanish. And there was a reason why I wanted to do Spanish, but I can't share that. It's confidential. But how do you deal with that, right? And of course, I'm very happy that he's learning Spanish. So and we'll talk about, I'm sure, about some of these challenges and others.
Great. So, Mariana, what's your story?
Yeah, I was actually born in Venezuela. I grew up monolingual. And it was when I moved to the United States right before high school that I really had my first taste of language. And it was as much a shock as you can imagine when you're a teenager and all you're trying to do is wanting to fit in. The last thing you want to do is you want to stick out and point out that you don't know what you're doing. But it was actually that experience that really sort of inspired me to do my part that I could to help bilingual learners, multilingual learners, to cater to their needs and support their learning. When the time came for me to have my own kids, I've got a 5-year-old girl and a 2-year-old boy. I mean, it was a no-brainer. I wanted them to have a connection to my culture, my heritage, which was part of who they are, and to kind of bring that bond between family and our own home. And I was supported that my husband, who's monolingual, has been the greatest supporter in not just that language piece, but that culture piece. So my own experience of learning it later on is something I'm really cognizant of, recognizing that our multilingual learners have their own unique needs. And it's something that I try to balance both when I was in the classroom with my own kids and with the multilingual community at large. I think one of the things is that many multilingual parents feel like they're alone because they don't necessarily have other multilingual families in their circle of friends at times, and they can't share those wins or those challenges in the same way. I can tell my monolingual friends all they want or all I want, and they think that they're helping and that their words are encouraging, but they don't quite understand all that it takes. So I'm excited to be a part of this and continue to spread the word and support multilingual parents that are doing such good work for their kids.
Wow, thank you so much. Wow, being last is tough after this, after your presentations. My little story before we jump into the panel. I grew up in Taiwan, so I'm half Taiwanese, half Japanese, and I went to an American school in Taiwan. And I came to Quebec. Right now, I'm in Quebec, so we have a sort of commonality there with Bill. So that gives me 4 languages, so Mandarin, Japanese, English, French, and then I added Spanish on my own later after high school. So these are the 5 same languages that I am teaching my kids using various methods that we could probably talk about in the panel per se. But I think these languages have helped me tremendously, obviously, in my private life and in my career. So it's quite important for me to pass these on. And having been raised myself multilingual as a child, I know that it works, especially when you start as early as possible. So I jumped on the ship right at the very beginning, and since day one, even before day one, I usually say I was talking to my wife's tummy in Mandarin to my kids. So starting early is quite important, and all the reasons are just benefits. All right, so that was a nice introduction from everybody. Thank you very much for that. And let's get into the meat and potatoes, so to speak. We are going to cover quite a lot today, but really the overarching questions I think we want to address in this panel is about the importance of multilingual education. Obviously, that's first and foremost. And to do that, we need better collaboration between the home and the school settings. So we need to optimize the environment, both at school, at home, for language acquisition. And finally, we may talk about a little bit about the minority language or heritage language at home. So let's start. I think we can start with the home environment, how we create a good environment at home. Our experts from the home side, I think we have Rita and Mariana could really lead this part, and from there we could maybe pull sort of direct into the school setting what we expect. So let's start from home. Who would like to start, Mariana or Rita? What does it take to really create a good optimal environment at home? What do you think?
Sure, I can start. I think my area of focus so far has been smaller children because my oldest is 5. And I think one of the most powerful things you can do is, for starters, start from day one. My kids only know how to be bilingual. They don't know any other way. But if you didn't start from day one, start now. Don't continue to delay it or just think about, maybe it'll be later. Maybe they're going to get confused. Just start as soon as you feel comfortable. But I think the biggest takeaway is you have to make it approachable for kids. And the best way to do that is through play. Kids at that age are really primed to do a lot of their learning and their best learning through play. And what's powerful about play is that it's developmentally appropriate. It's something that you can adjust as they grow older, or you can kind of tailor it down for some of your younger kids. And so I tell parents, even if you are inundating them with language in many other ways, think about how you're spending that one-on-one time with your kids. So set a goal to play with them 30 minutes a day. If you can't do that, at least dedicate 10 minutes. Find the right rhythm. Possible, dedicate those 10 minutes or those 30 minutes for one child. I know that's easier said than done, but find that rhythm where it feels appropriate for you. And set that time and play with your kids. I notice it with my own daughter. If she starts pushing back or I see that English is creeping in, I always kind of reflect and realize I'm not playing as much. So I add up that time and I look specifically at what her interests are, and that's what we talk about. So right now it's Disney princesses, and you better believe that we've got every Disney princess you can think of, and we can create this imaginary worlds where she doesn't feel like I'm teaching her. She's just engaging with me at a very authentic and appropriate level for her. And that's where some of the best learning happens. So we're constantly thinking of how to rack our brains. What gadget, what tool, what app can we use? Look internally and think about how you're spending your time and make sure that it's purposeful.
Wow, authentic. I mean, probably quite difficult indeed when you have to really think about it deeply, but creating a pattern, I think you mentioned, or rhythm, I think.
Carving out a time to spend that time. And it doesn't even have to be that difficult. Just follow their lead with their imagination. And you'll find that a lot of that vocabulary just starts to explode and it spills into other times of their day.
Very, very important. I try to mention a lot about habits, creating a habit. I think that's quite important. And your talk is really aligned to that. So Rita,
yes, I absolutely agree with everything that Marianne said. And whatever you call it, rhythm, habits, or I often speak about a routine. Especially, we're speaking a lot about school today. It's so important that you get into the routine of speaking a language with your child before they enter the school and get inundated and immersed in the majority language if they're going to a single language school. So the most important thing I usually say, you need to create an environment where the child wants and needs to speak a language. So, and the want comes from things like what Mariana just explained, that it's fun, that you don't have to push your child towards the language, but that the language pulls your child to it because it's so interesting, it's so fun. Okay, let's play that game that we always do in this language. Oh, can we go to that place? And then you have created a place where a routine of we always speak this language when we go to the shop or we go to the zoo, and we choose a certain language. And then there's the need. Children are very pragmatic. They take the easy way out whenever they can. It's not, and that's it's really important for parents to remember that it's nothing against them. It's nothing against you as a parent if your child, for example, doesn't want to speak a language. No, because they just do what's easiest. And when you think about it, it's a really clever thing to do. Why use more energy if you can get away in an easy way? So for us as parents, the task is to create the need to make them be in situations where they have to use a language, where it's the kind of only option. It's sometimes difficult if the child grows up knowing that both parents are completely bilingual. So then with small children, there are tricks to do this. Like I've just introduced a monolingual Moomin troll to my grandson, because he absolutely doesn't understand any English at all. Doesn't matter if mom and grandma and everybody else understand it, but the Moomin troll doesn't understand it. So now he knows that toy only speaks Swedish. So he has to use Swedish with it. So yes, the want and the need are the big ones, and the routine to be in the home languages need to be on a really solid basis when the child enters school, because it's so much changes at that point. In my work as a family language coach, I have noticed that parents bring up exactly this problem, that they say, well, my child was fluent in the language until the age of 4 or 5, but then when they went to nursery or school, it all just dropped away. So that's why it's so important to kind of build it up prior to starting school.
Wow, definitely great points. There's something I was looking for in our discussion, and I'll throw it out there to see what we can generate from this. I follow in our home religiously the OPAL method: one person, one language, or one parent, one language. Personally, that's how I grew up, and I am seeing tremendous results with my own children. What do you guys think about that as part of creating the optimal environment at home? One person, one language. How do you set that up if you follow that?
We do.
Go on, Mariana.
We do one person, one language in my home. I speak exclusively in Spanish. My husband does English. It's really easy for my husband. It's a community language. But for me, there are times that my daughter she hears me speak English to my husband. She hears me in the community, and she's tried that with me, and she's called me out on it. She's 5, and she says, you speak English. And I just remind her of what the expectation is. It goes back to Rita's point about the need. I create a need for her to speak Spanish to me, and I say, it's right, I speak English, but you and I speak Spanish. And I just remind her of that. And it's something I often say to her, and she just remembers. And I hear a lot of parents say, I don't want them to have a negative connotation with the language. And that's important, but you have to still be firm with your expectation. It doesn't have to be negative. And so I make sure that I remind her of that, but then still create those positive recommendations or experiences with kids. Now, I think every family is different, and there are different family dynamics, which is why it's so great to have so many language policies. But it is one of the most tried and true ones.
Yes, absolutely agree with Mariana. And for you, Tetsu, since you have 5 languages, I can't see really any other effective way than doing one person and one language. In other scenarios, let's say when there is only 2, when there are only 2 languages, then what's actually turned out to be most effective is that to use the minority language at home only and nothing else. But that's when there are only 2 languages. So, but every family is different, because it depends so much on how much exposure there is to each language, and how much time and how much direct interaction a child gets in a language. So there is no clear-cut one solution works for all. You have to find out what works in each family, and then roll with it.
Oh, that's an interesting point, because I never really thought about that. Okay, so if there's only 2 languages, it's better to have the minority language at home, and use the I guess the community language outside of home. That does actually reinforce the setting pretty well.
Yes, Annick de Houwer did some research in the Netherlands about this, and the success rate is about 96% or something with the minority language at home approach, while it goes down to 60% with one parent, one language. So, but these families are also different, but those are the general numbers.
That's great.
One of the challenges is that, as Rita says, the families can be really different, and so. Bernard Spolsky writes about this, and I saw this in my own family. We used Armenian with our son before he went to school, but I'm not a native speaker of Armenian. My wife is a native speaker. And so our son would answer me in English at age 2. And you really can't impose. You can imposing your will on a 2-year-old, but he'd answer his mother in Armenian. And toddlers are incredible language sponges, and they're very, the research shows even, in the prenatal stages, they can differentiate voices and they can determine who's a native speaker of one or another language. And Bernard Spolsky, who's a very highly proficient speaker of Hebrew, writing about his own grandkids, that he would speak to them in Hebrew and they would answer him in English, because English is his L1, albeit it's New Zealand English. And so that mosaic, it's really challenging, right? And so I never did get him to do much with me in Armenian. But my daughter will answer me in Armenian. So, and the kids vary too. So you have all of these factors to balance.
Well, I think it was interesting that Mariana pointed out that your child pointed out that you speak English also. People do ask me that a lot. They say, well, the kids see you speak Japanese. I speak Mandarin. I mean, only Mandarin with the kids. And audience would ask me, well, people see you speak Japanese with your wife or English with your friends or whatever. And I've never had my kids point me out, so to speak. In fact, they know very well that I speak these different languages. And I mentioned this earlier, I always stress this, and it is the fact that you need to build a habit. So that's where Oppo really comes in. It's consistency. They know that when they talk to me, it's in Mandarin. We have, I think we got a little comment from Joey Perugino, my co-organizer for Langfest. He talks about his niece having a hard time also going back to French, even though when he's trying to teach her Spanish. So these are items, I guess, if you already began to speak various languages with the children, I think what it takes is to really, it's a little higher hurdle at the beginning, but you need to be consistent and just use one language so that the child associates you with that language, and it becomes weird otherwise. When I first came to Canada, actually, I was 13 and I was learning French, but I had my aunt, my father's youngest sister, so I knew she spoke Mandarin as a native language, but she systematically or categorically refused to speak Mandarin with me and just used French, even though her French was not her native language. And at the beginning, it was very weird. But later, it became weird for me to speak Mandarin with her. I mean, so I think that's what we want to strive for with the children, so that it becomes weird to do otherwise.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. When you can do this is ideal, but there are also situations where parents, like I was in that situation where I wanted to pass on both Finnish and Swedish to my eldest daughter. And then kind of that goes out the window. I just want to bring it up that there are other ways. It's not the only way. Mariana and I have a fellow foreign language coach who teaches her children both English and Spanish by switching every 2 weeks. She's got 4 children now, and she's been doing this for years, and the children are growing up like that. So there are other approaches as well.
Absolutely.
But there needs to, you do need to find a routine independent of what you're doing.
Tetsu, what language do the kids speak among themselves?
I get this also quite often. I would say their default language is Japanese. My mother, who lives with us also, is Japanese, and my wife is Japanese. So I always say, well, the strong side, the women's side, is Japanese. No, but seriously, I think they spend more time with mom, I guess. So default language, when nothing's happening, it's usually Japanese for now. I expect it to become French, as their education language is French whenever they go to kindergarten, their kindergarten or their daycare. But interestingly, still so far, what I do observe is that they use the language of the context. So if they're playing with me, they will speak to each other in Mandarin. If they're playing with mom, it'll be in Japanese. If they're playing with our au pair, who's from Mexico, they'll be doing it in Spanish. So they are able to adapt to the context. If nothing's happening, if they're just playing alone, then usually I hear Japanese, sometimes Mandarin.
I fear, well, the way I see it with my daughters is that it seems like the younger one is a better French speaker than the older one, and that has been reinforced by the fact that there were now 2 speakers, children speaking to each other and playing with each other in the home, and that was an interesting fact. The other thing is that they do speak together in French, but when they play on their own, they play in English, which is also very intriguing. It's like they're rehashing what happened during the day at school, but that goes on in English, whereby when they play together as sisters, it's in French. I don't know if you've experienced this, the same thing.
Well, I think it's coming. I do expect a mixture of things coming up as they discover more and more about languages, about culture, and also their interaction with their peers. I think there will come a moment where, I mean, I hope not, but they may start to refuse to speak Mandarin or Japanese. So I'm ready for all eventuality, I guess. But I think my most important point is to start early and cram in as much as possible, and hope for the best. In that sense, I mean, I can't control everything that's outside my home, outside my context.
Yeah, and I think it's important for anyone listening who may be experiencing some pushback. It's just remembering that it's parenting, right? And those are typical family dynamics in a lot of cases. Don't get discouraged. Kids push boundaries. That's sort of their job at this age. And just like we stand firm with discipline, just like we start firm with, no, you don't put your feet on the table, we can still gently set those expectations with language, just remembering that it's just another element that we've chosen to add, a very relevant element, but it's very similar to some of the other parenting challenges that we have.
Fantastic. All right. So how about we switch gears a little bit and sort of go towards the schools? Well, possibly we could start from the home side, what we expect from schools, or we can even go in a little bit into what we expect from teachers and as a counter, parents, sort of the roles of each side. How about we start with Fabrice? Maybe you could lead this in.
Sure, yes. Well, from my experience in New York, the parents who wanted to sustain their language at home, they realized that they needed the help of schools, basically, to continue that effort. It seems to be you lose your native language pretty quickly in this country. Some people say it's a matter of one generation, 2 generations, and that's it. Your heritage language has disappeared. And a lot of the families that I've met with and helped wanted to maintain their linguistic heritage, and also they were developing strategies at home. They needed the help of schools to do it. And the beauty of these schools in Brooklyn and in other parts of the city, that they now offer the dual language programs that allows you to learn in 2 languages simultaneously. So 50% of the time you will be learning in French and the 50% in English. And the same thing goes with the classroom. 50% of the kids are French speakers and 50% of the kids are English dominant speakers. That makes them teach each other languages. And I think it works perfectly for heritage language families. It works perfectly for English language learners, and it works perfectly for families who seek to bring bilingualism or multilingualism to their children. And you can start these programs very young. Some of them start in pre-K here in New York, so that's when the kids are age 4. My daughters go through one in Brooklyn, and it's wonderful as not only as a linguistic tool, but also they will interact with other children who speak the same language or are in the same linguistic situation of having to deal with 2 lives, 2 languages, 2 cultures, and so forth. So that's something that I have a lot of hopes for in this country and in other countries in particular, is that finally these dual language programs represent a good solution for a number of linguistic communities and for people interested in learning languages.
So do you see a sort of a fragmentation of the schooling in pairs of languages that people want to learn? In other words, I of course there are international schools that are French and English, Spanish and English. Will there be more and more of those, and will they sort of
The schools that I talk about in my book and in other examples is that they're mostly public schools or charter schools. Of course, those programs exist in private schools and they're very good as well. But for many families in New York City, at least, it's very hard to pay for these types of schools. So the fact that public schools have now embraced this type of education and allow for parents to come in and if there are enough families interested, then yes, we can start a dual language program from pre-K or kindergarten all the way up to high school for some of them. And I think that's the beauty of it. It's not creating a separation within the school. These are complementary programs that will definitely boost a school's results. It has an impact on the school. It has an impact on the student. It has an impact on the community that the school serves. And that I think is beautiful when it happens in the public, no tuition, free school. That gives an opportunity to more and more linguistic communities to join and benefit from this type of education. And I think that's also the best way for our kids to make sense of the languages that they have and that they're going to keep for a long time.
That's great. Well, thank you for the insights on the school side, I guess, the programs that we could have. What does it take really for parents and schools to collaborate, work together for this to work well? What are the expectations? I mean, from each side. I think I could throw this out to all of you at once. From the home perspective, what we expect from the schools, and from the school perspective, what do we expect from the parents? What are the key elements that are required for this to really expand and grow and work well?
Well, I think not everyone. I'm excited to see how many schools and how many school districts are trying to bring these models. I think there were so many misconceptions about bilingual education. Now everybody wants to jump on the bandwagon, but it hasn't hit everybody. So if you find yourself in a community that doesn't offer these programs, there's still a lot that you can do. You are going to have to really keep a good communication with your child's teacher so you understand what's the type of vocabulary that your child is learning in the classroom, so that you can then infuse that vocabulary with your own target language. It just happened to me a few weeks. My daughter came home so excited, showing me this book that she had made about a mole, and she started to want to tell me in Spanish, but I immediately recognized she doesn't know how to say mole in Spanish. We haven't come across this. And I could see kind of her gears turning. So it's just a good reminder that vocabulary that she's learning, if I want to have those same experiences, if I want her to have that kind of knowledge, I'm going to have to step up and know what to teach her. And the best way to do that is by having that communication with your teacher. So early in the school year, just establish and help them understand what your dynamics like at home, what you're trying to supplement in the home. Then you want to kind of work with your child's teacher to understand what they're learning so you can also do it. And then don't be afraid to have reminders throughout the year, check in those student-teacher meetings to have that communication. And then offer yourself up to volunteer from time to time in the classroom, maybe read a story in the target language, something else so that your child also sees how cool it is to speak another language and be able to have those same experiences with their friends.
Yeah, one big thing that would be great if teachers would express to children that they support their home languages, that their school thinks it's a great idea, and because it's a research fact that the better a child knows its home language, whatever language, it doesn't matter what language it is useful for learning the school language. So if a child has grasped some abstract concepts in one language, those skills are transferable. So and that means they can then learn them in the school language as well. So unfortunately, I still come across parents who come to me and they say, well, my teacher or my child's teacher said that he doesn't speak well enough yet, that we should switch to speaking English at home. And telling that to two parents whose home native language is not English, is not helpful. And it also kind of gives the child the impression that the language they speak at home is not as good as the language spoken at school. So to instill the belief in that all languages are good, your home language is equally important and good as the language you speak at school. That's what I think would be a big step forward if all teachers would kind of embrace that.
I totally agree. Oh wow! From that perspective, we really need to be aligned from all that. I mean, not just schools. I mean, outside of your family, your friends. I think you need to make sure that everybody is able to not discriminate against different languages or laugh at the minority language, that kind of thing. We are getting quite a lot of comments, and I do want to pick one out that sort of can put a concluding feel to this section. But hang on, before that, something just popped into my mind. The collaboration part. I remember seeing something recently on TV, this app. You know how with schools, we have this little notebook, the school would write about the children or the grades and whatnot, the comments for the parents. There was actually an app that actually does that. I mean, there's privacy issues and whatnot, but they were talking about an app that parents can put on their phone, and then at schools they could put everything in there, and then they could build a little community of teachers around that. And I thought that was a great idea. They can get past the privacy issues. But technology, I think, is also something that's going to really help us bridge the gap.
Absolutely. This is something which is in place in all schools in Finland already. So parents can go online and in some certain cases even kind of catch up during the day. So
yeah, that's right. Okay, so this comment we have from Marion from Barden Linguistics. I think the gist of it is that there shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all for anything. And I think even if we extend it to the schools, we were talking about this earlier at home, there's no one-size-fits-all, whether it's OPAL or other methods. And I think that's really an overarching theme for anything that's related to raising children bilingual or multilingual. And it stretches across to the schools, the different programs that we have. As much customization we can do realistically is quite important. So I'm going to transition on to the government aspects so that we can hear more from Bill. Bill is the executive director of the Joint National Committee of Language. What was it? Sorry.
Joint National Committee for Languages.
There you go. Okay.
So what I do is I lobby in Washington, D.C. on behalf of 140 plus member organizations for federal funding and regulations around language research, training, and development. And I do this from a position as a multilingual myself, as somebody who has worked as a translator and interpreter, a classroom teacher, college professor, a researcher, and a private sector business person in the language world. So I've done this since I was a kid, really, since I was 19 years old when I did my first interpreting gig. And it's based on the overall story that for a country that sees itself as resolutely Anglophone is sort of an éclat, right? It's a lightning bolt, that there are all of these cognitive and educational and societal benefits to being a multilingual individual and having a plurilingual society. And we see that reflected, for example, Fabrice was talking about the growth in immersions, something like a fourfold growth of immersions in the last 10 years. So more than 4,000 dual language immersion elementary schools in the United States, so at least a stream, if not a full school. So what the government sees in a pretty much a nonpartisan way is that these programs are worth supporting, that the lifelong benefits of being functionally bilingual and biliterate, that the average age of the onset of the symptoms of dementia is delayed by 4 years for people who are bilingual. Brain's still rotting away, but it's a stronger brain, right, to start with. Better financial decisions made by bilinguals, although for some reason that My wife never believes that, but I just imagine how much worse I would be if I were monolingual. Bilinguals make more money in their careers, all things being equal. If Fabrice and I are both international affairs specialists, but he speaks 3 languages and I speak 1. Guess who gets hired, or guess who gets promoted, guess who gets paid more. And that's a great story to tell. It goes down very easy. The challenge then is sort of twofold. At the societal level in the States, and I think to some degree in the UK, worked pretty closely with the British Academy on some of these issues. You get these myths, everybody's learning English. Okay, well, that may be true. That doesn't mean they will learn English. There's an app for that. Well, if you talk to the people who make Google Translate, they'll tell you it's got some really significant limitations and some contexts where it's not appropriate and so on. Or I took 4 years of German and I couldn't order a beer in Berlin. Okay, I think that particular person was being a bit hyperbolic, but all of that's out there on the one hand, and then we see it reflected in our local contexts where teachers will say, no, you shouldn't, you should use only English, or you should use only English on the playground. And so, for example, my kids went to a very diverse elementary school. My daughter's still in this elementary school, probably 11 languages, and among her 22 classmates in her kindergarten. And when she goes out on the playground, the kids trade languages. They learn how to say hello and whatever the potty words they're not supposed to say are, right? And they come home and say, what does this mean in French? I'm not going to repeat this on the podcast. But then they're told by well-meaning, well-intentioned adults, don't do that, right? And sometimes they're the same adults who live in the neighborhood say, oh, you're raising your kids bilingual, isn't that great? So there's still all these myths, and being able to get after the very specific myth that the best way to get to high levels of biliteracy and bilingualism is to maintain both of them, right? Not to force people to switch to English, or not to take the English learners, the EDELs as they call them now, but the heritage speakers, and say, oh, you can only use English, we're going to do total immersion. It's counterintuitive, and humans don't like things that are counterintuitive, right? And so what it comes down to, and what my job is in part, working with partners and allies like Fabrice, but our member organizations, is to take that research literature and all those findings and translate them. Sorry, I can't believe I said that, but to translate them in ways that are digestible and understandable and actionable for teachers and administrators and for parents, and that's really where it comes in. So we have our advocacy days, and on Thursday we're taking about 120 people around Capitol Hill and the executive branch to talk about all of our programs and to tell our story. And Fabrice is going to be one of our keynote speakers Thursday morning. You can follow that at hashtag JNCL18. But really, that's the government more or less gets it, especially at the national level. We have to get more of that at the local level and the state level, and even in diverse areas like the Metro DC area or Greater New York, you still get pushback, you still get resistance, and so it's just a matter of being persistent. It's taken me 25 years to figure out there's no magic bullet, that this is an evergreen challenge. We always have to tell the story, but I enjoy doing it.
Well, thank you very much. There definitely is no magic bullet. That's one of the key messages I think we can conclude on from all the talks. Our organizer Paulino actually has an interesting question from the other perspective, I guess. So you mentioned about what the government is doing in collaboration, I guess, with the homes and the teachers and institutions. So what do you expect from the parents and teachers, how they can advocate for bilingualism and multilingual education? What are your expectations?
My expectations, it's I think you get out and tell your story. That's actually a really good question. I can put all those expectations on an organizational level. But I think, relating the story that you have, relating your personal encounters and your personal journey with being part of more than one culture, right? That changes us, and people are afraid of change. You don't necessarily want to be a different version of yourself, but you want to be a better version of yourself. And that having lived and worked abroad, having heard more than one language all my life, it gives me a very different perspective than I would have otherwise had. And I think being able to tell that story and make that concrete and say, well, I got to have visited places and done things I never would have otherwise, and understood different perspectives and different people's perspectives, perhaps more deeply than otherwise. And being able to say that as part of the story, right? Being able to tell our personal stories is really important.
Yeah, and I think that what gives me hope is that parents can play a part in this country and in other countries. Not only of course, they need to educate themselves about the benefits of bilingualism, dual language education, and heritage languages. But they can organize, they can lobby, they can reach out to their school principals, and that in itself is a power. It's something that parents need to grasp. This power can change a school. It can change the way things are taught in the school. It can change the academic results of these. So the students, it can change the way teachers teach. It can also have an impact on the way the role that the school will play in the community, in the city. So it has a wider impact even on our society. So parents, for me, and I think that's what I'll be saying on Thursday on Capitol Hill, that parents can be a key to developing, promoting, enhancing the language education in this country and in other countries. I always think that in my own country, which still is pretty much monolingual, that there should be more dual language programs like these, and not just in English, in Spanish, in Arabic, in all these languages.
I think you're absolutely right. I think the challenges we have, especially in I'm now living in the UK, and it's the same in the US, that it is, although a multicultural community, very, very monolingual country in the end. And often I have the feel that I'm preaching to the converted. Our challenge is, how do we reach out to the parents, to the monolingual parents, to kind of the general public, to get a more positive attitude and the understanding of how, like all the positives that you mentioned, Bill, how important it is, and how every child can have that. And even monolingual parents can be supportive of a child growing up with more than one language, because they're giving a child another language gives them another point of view. It makes them more open-minded. And I always say that children that speak more than one language, they become the global citizens of the future, who can cross the cultural, generational, and geographical borders much more easily than a monolingual person can do. And that is so important in our world of today.
Go ahead.
I just want to, one of the myths that's out there about education in general is that the brain is like your coffee cup. You can only put so much in. And if you put too many languages in, something else gets pushed out. And that's what we run into. Languages for the smart people, they've got bigger coffee cups, and that's not the case. And we have to push back on that too.
One other thing that I would add that parents can do is and I speak from experience from my community, it seems that those that are lucky enough to have language programs funded by the state or local, when budget cuts come, language programs are often the ones on the chopping block. So being really cognizant of what's happening in your community. So when those budget hearings happen, you're there and you're speaking about the benefits that it's brought to your children, and you're fighting from those programs. So being really active, really appreciating the fact that you've got access to this and being able to support the schools when the budget comes, and then also reaching out to your school and making sure that they feel supported. Oftentimes they're grasping at straws to get resources in the target language because it's harder. So seeing what part you can do to help those teachers, those principals that are so dedicated to teaching your kids another language.
Well, Thank you all. Wow, this has been quite heated discussion. I feel that we've only touched the tip of the iceberg, and we could probably go on for another 3-4 hours. But what we're going to do right now is actually close once here and open it up to the audience to get stuff. But we can continue on if we don't get any questions, further questions from the audience. We do have the time, so I am cognizant about the time. So let's first close, and as a conclusion, I think we have touched on the importance of starting early, of multilingual education, and all stakeholders that need to contribute from their side. So what I'm going to do is pick up a question from Scott. This probably opens up another whole can of worms, but he's asking if we have any examples of good applications or products that you can recommend. So this is probably more for Rita and Mariana for teaching children languages at home or otherwise, I guess. Apps, games, anything, tools.
Well, nowadays there is an app for everything, of course, but this would be language specific. I would say that human interaction will always be better than any app. I'll have to state that before I start kind of speaking of the pros for apps. But anything that the child enjoys, that it finds fun and kind of an app that will increase in difficulty in a natural way with certain amount of repetition, that kind of app is good. Some parents use like cue cards and things. These work to a certain extent, but if you want to reach kind of more than just vocabulary, many of the apps that exist are mostly for vocabulary, but for the interaction, I think nothing beats a human.
Yeah, they're very language specific. And I agree with Rita. We actually use very few apps because I want to use that one-on-one time more than I can. But if you do want to reach out to apps, if you've got younger kids, Gus on the Go is a really good starter. It has like 89 introductory words, and then it kind of builds. They've got an extension for some languages where they actually leverage Aesop fables into stories. So you pick up a few more of the grammar, because that is, as Rita pointed out, one of the faulty things about using an app. If you got older kids, Duolingo is actually a great app as well. And they've got games, and it's all set kind of on a game mind frame. So kids want to get their little diamonds. It has a reminder. So that's good. Mama Lingua, if you are a non-native Spanish speaker, maybe you learn Spanish in college, you may not have that like mother-ese words like bath time or changing a diaper. Well, Mama Lingua has kind of a cheat sheet of like the typical phrases that you want to tell your kids in Spanish, so that if that's the language you're working on. And then FaceTime or Skype, that actually is not the same as watching a video because it's interactive. So if you've got grandparents or other friends who speak the target language and you want to bring in those linguistic role models, those are actually good things to have because of that interaction. So it builds some of the vocabulary and the grammar, and it helps to build a bond with the person on the other side as well. So great for grandparents, for example.
I like apps that could do more than that, in the sense that children needs other children to learn from, and it works faster. If there were apps that could connect people in real life rather than virtually, that would solve one of the problems. I think the one app that I have in mind that is currently being developed by Barden Linguistics is using geolocalization so that children and families and even adults can find each other and exchange languages live, in real life rather than virtually. So these are key components, I think, for language learning, being in front of humans rather than machines. But that's my own take on that.
Yes, there are also online like language buddy. If one looks for language buddy applications where you can sign in, and then there are vetted people participating, and you can find someone who can exchange languages. Maybe you speak they speak a language you are learning, and then vice versa. So yeah.
Oh, my wife really likes to pick up these apps to write Chinese characters. Starting from the easy ones, and they get points, writing it in the right order, the strokes and whatnot. So I think we can go on forever just on the apps and stuff. But do you guys know of any place that curates the information? I don't know, maybe one of your websites that has that sort of a site that reviews many of these apps for children or for young adults.
I think what you'll find is, go ahead. A lot of the information is language specific. So I can think of some example for Spanish apps, but you can also, if you come across something and you want to just do a parent review, there are websites that just review apps in general and give them a score based on the parenting value. But I would always just encourage you, use that. Like maybe when you don't have the one-on-one time with your kids, but don't ever replace it.
Absolutely.
One website which I would recommend to go on, because there's tons of resources out there, is Omniglot. I think it's omniglot.com. He's got loads and loads of links to, and he's got kind of every imaginable language in the world listed on his site.
Well, yes, Omniglot is actually a tremendous site. I know the guy behind it, Simon Ager. He's a good friend. So yes, it's an amazing site with a lot of information for all ages, really. It's like an encyclopedia. So we also got some comments. Clue games is something that somebody brought up, which is an anonymous comment. But like I said, it's from the private sector. I think creating these apps is something that is a hot industry. There's new ones popping up all the time, and children spend more and more time on these devices. So I fully agree with you guys. We only let them use the iPad or our iPhone only when we can't spend the time with them. But we try to do it as much as possible to spend our time one-on-one or groups to ensure that they have the human interaction.
We raising these digital native kids and who are totally addicted to the screens, and it turns out that, hey, you can have your half-hour screen time, but you can only use a language app. So that's like a sort of you're killing two birds with one stone there. Right?
Yeah, it's aligning the incentives. It's also something we can use to get them to do other things.
That's what we do with cartoons and our daughters. They only watch cartoons in French.
When they are a little bit elder, then you can change the operating system to the language they need to learn.
You can find Peppa Pig in YouTube in just about every language you can think of. It seems to be the universal cartoon.
You have to actually be careful. You need to listen to them, because there are also fake translations out there, which are horrible. So you need to always listen first. And when you see a translation, always listen to it first before you let your child listen to it.
Yeah, I think Scott mentioned this earlier. A lot of what we talk about today, I mean, we are focusing on kids, but definitely this is something that can be applied to adult learners as well. I mean, they may not watch Peppa Pig, but there's translations of many of their favorite programs on YouTube and other sites.
Netflix is offering you the option of choosing the language, and I've watched Frozen in maybe 3 or 4 languages now.
That's a great point. And the Netflix translations are beautiful. They're really, really good. So if you're lucky that your language is translated, it's a good choice.
Wow. Okay. So can I backtrack just a little bit and sort of come into some of we talked about some myths. And there's one that's there all the time, and I think we covered it a little bit, but I'd like to get each of your insights on not only starting early, but there's a lot of people who say you must learn languages one at a time. I think Bill alluded to the coffee mug. So I'd like to develop that a little bit more. What do you think are all the pros and cons, if you weigh them? I do see that you start a little later. If you learn 2 or 3 or 4 languages at once, you do start a little later. That's the only sort of negative point that I can think of.
There are a couple of myths to unpack, right? And I think I was reading Mariana's biography, and you lived in Germany at one point. I was born in Germany. My folks were stationed there. And as a toddler, I spoke German and English perfectly well. The brain differentiates those, again, in utero. So one of the myths is you have to do it sequentially. And in point of fact, that's not true at all. And children will, from, in utero up to, college or whenever, because you never really stop learning. That's the other myth I'm going to get to. It can differentiate. And sometimes it's messy, especially if you're learning languages with false cognates and so on. But that gets teased out. And the other thing is that one of the reasons children are so good, they're primed to learn how to communicate, how to interact with the world around them and the people around them to get the things they need, to manipulate their parents as they get older. But adults, when you get to high school and into college and on beyond, it's not that we can't learn language as well. It's just that, I've got a job, I've got mortgages, I've got to, take the garbage out, I've got to make the kids' lunches. And so the time that I'm spending on learning Irish, which I'm doing, gets compressed. The time I spend on trying to improve my Spanish or my German gets compressed. And when you're, a 5-year-old kid, when you step back and look at what happens in a kindergarten, you're learning how to, read and count and get along with the other kids around them and to communicate. And that's such a huge part of the first however many years of cognitive development. That's why it's prime time. But you don't have to do it sequentially. That differentiation happens automatically. And as I said, the infants can recognize different languages, different dialects of the same language, different regional accents of the same language. That just sort of happens automatically. You don't have to do it sequentially.
Yeah, I think code switching is the biggest fear that people have. So, I think that was part of your comment. So code switching, people think that's something that's evidence of confusion, and obviously that clears up, in a matter of a few years.
There's a lot of research into code switching now, and it's clear that it's a highly developed skill, and it follows certain strict rules, and it's anything but confusion. Bilinguals code switch with other bilinguals. A grown bilingual won't code switch with a monolingual person. Yes, small children mix their language. That's not strictly speaking code switching when they throw in a word from another language when they're 2, 3, or 4 years old. It's because that's the word they happen to know. Again, they're being pragmatical and just using whatever they know. So I know that word, so I'll use it. And like Bill said, it will sort itself out after. By the time they're about 5 or so, the languages will separate, and they will know which words belongs to which. And it's nothing to be worried about. That's just a part. What we need to get away from is that there is only one way to develop. That there's one monolingual way to develop linguistically. Bilingual development is different. Your child is learning an immense amount of words and phrases and everything in parallel, and it's just the way how bilingual or multilingual children learn, and it is nothing to be afraid of. It's just that we need to get away from the monolingual standard. We shouldn't compare bilingual monolingual children to the way how monolingual children learn languages. It's different.
It's a funny story. My daughter's favorite games right now is to speak with a French accent. So they will speak like this all the time, and they will. Now they don't speak with any accent, but they will make an effort to speak with a French accent whenever possible. And they'll do the same thing with the English accent. They'll speak with a real
they are doing that in
English
French.
accent.
That shows control, definitely, over the accents.
Yeah.
And I think that's also a tremendous advantage for starting early. They have the ears really sensitive and tuned to all the languages. A baby, is born with the capacity to hear everything, obviously. So that capacity somehow fades away to a certain degree as we grow up. It's an observation. I don't know if it's physiological or any or otherwise, but the observation, at least, is that adults have a tougher time with accents. So that's also an additional point, I think, that Fabrice touched upon indirectly with your games. That's funny, because the kids have a tremendous control over the accent, and they are able to play games with it. So, all right. So I don't know if you guys have any other comments on this item. We do want to save some time for each of you to talk about your projects, whatever you're doing. Give you a minute or two to talk about what you do and promote your projects. So maybe I could start with Bill. I know that there's a language day coming up.
Sure, language advocacy days, which are this Thursday, Friday. We do this every year in February and bring people in to talk to Congress and the executive branch, and then to places like the Chamber of Commerce and so on. We have our website is languagepolicy.org. There's a lot of resources there on that summarize the research literature and summarize the benefits of multilingualism and multiliteracy in ways that are appropriate to use with parents, with teachers, with school administrators, with local government officials, school boards, and so on. I know that Mariana talked about that, alluded to that, and I want to finish on that a little bit, because we, and Fabrice can appreciate this coming from France, and Rita from Finland and the UK. We have 55 states and territories, each with its own education agency. And then we have more than 18,000 local school districts, and each of them has a great deal of control. And then we have something like 90,000 actual school buildings, and each of them has a degree of control that mean that it's really important to advocate at the local level and to make sure that that parents are visible and that they are in touch with the principals, in touch with the teachers, the principals, and the decision makers above them, and giving them the information that we have, that we know intuitively, and giving it to them in a way that they can absorb readily. We have a lot of that information on our website.
Thank you very much. Who wants to go next? Fabrice, want to go?
I can talk about what is keeping me busy right now. I wrote this book, The Bilingual Revolution, and now I'm finding that parents in many cities are interested in doing what the book talks about, which was mostly written with the parents in New York, and what we started 10 years ago with dual language programs in French, and then in Japanese, and in Italian, in German, Russian, and other languages. So this is a good sign for me that there is a growing interest from heritage language communities across the nation that this could be a good way, a good strategy to not only sustain the home language, but also acquire other languages. Multilingualism is a reality that is definitely coming to this country. So I'm busy translating the book in all the languages that I can. So that's another thing. I'm trying to have the book translated in Japanese, in Chinese, in Russian, in Polish, in Spanish, of course, in German and in Italian, so that more communities can grasp what it takes to create your own dual language program from the bottom up, from grassroots type of parental efforts that will, for me, that will solve this, what Bill was describing about the United States and how decentralized the school system is. It's mind-boggling for someone coming from a very centralized country like France. How do you deal with a country like this? How do you bring these ideas into schools? And I think parents, and mostly parents from linguistic communities, can bring that change. So that's the project I'm on at the moment.
Thank you. Rita?
Yes, I've been speaking about or trying to promote language learning within the family and passing on family languages now for, when did I start my blog? 6 years ago. It's something I'm passionate about. Children and languages, they are my passion, and that's why I wrote my book, bringing up a bilingual child as well. And that's what I write about on my multilingualparenting.com website. And in our Facebook group, we've also got a Facebook group where we bring families together and parents, where they can share their concerns and their victories and their joys and their challenges, because that's what I found. Sometimes when I speak about these things, well, I feel that, well, I have said this 100 times over and over again, the same thing. I think I've said enough, but then I get an email from a parent who's been told to drop a language by a doctor, or who's been told to only speak a certain language at home, or who kind of think that their own language is not that important. There are so many things that are still unresolved. So yeah, I will keep on working this and working with families and helping them. As a family language coach, what I do one-to-one is I meet up with families online, then understand through interviews and discussions their situation, and then help them set up the best way how they can pass on the languages within their families. And I don't think this is ever. I hope I wouldn't be needed one day, but as I see it today, there's still a lot to do.
Thank you. Mariana?
Sure. Before I jump into what I do, I just wanted to leave our viewers with one tip. I know that sometimes it can feel daunting if you're tired, your kids are pushing back, and they're maybe not behaving. You're just you can feel frustrated at times. But the first thing is to remember that this is a marathon, not a sprint. Tomorrow's another day. Take it day by day, as Adam Beck often says. But then the other thing is to really try to take some time to set some goals for what you want your kids to be able to do. If you want your kids to be able to read and write in your language, that's great. If you just want them to be able to talk to grandma, that's okay too. Everyone's going to have a different passion, but knowing what you want them to do is going to help you along the way. Just like in parenting, you're going to face lots of forks in the road. And if you're clear on that vision, you're going to know where to go. If you want them to be able to read and write, but they don't have access to a school in your target language, then either you're going to have to teach them or someone else is going to kind of help you with those decisions. And that's some of the work that I try to do with my own website and my podcast called Bilingual Avenue. And it's meant to be a guide for parents on what to do, how to do it, and what to expect when raising bilingual kids. You can access the podcast for free on iTunes. I've had Rita on the show before, and lots of familiar faces in the world of raising bilingual kids. I also interview families because sometimes you can read the theory, but the practice in the day-to-day can be really different. And it just serves as a reminder that you're not alone. And then we have a membership as well with a membership forum for parents to connect with others around the world and share those wins, those successes, troubleshoot, and get resources. And you can find that all at bilingualavenue.com.
Thank you so much to everybody. Let me take a minute to talk about my other gigs. I am one of the organizers for the Montreal Langfest. So here's a logo. So langfest.org is where you can get all the information. It is a festival for all language lovers, and we also talk about how to raise multilingual children. Last year we had the little Russian girl, Russian prodigy called Bella Devyatkina. She's 5 years old and speaks 8 languages. So there are different prodigies out there, and there's also your children who are prodigies in their own right. So we have sessions on that, and also, of course, it's a language festival. All aspects of language learning, teachers, students, translators, you name it, anything that has to do with language and culture is in our scope. Our next one is this year in August 21st to 26th. And if you watch this video, you can sign up with a 25% discount using LLS, that's Language Learning Summit, as a promo code. So go to langfest.org for that. Otherwise, yes, I have my own website, asktetsu.com, where you can visit and seek out some material if you want to ask some questions about how I raise my children to become multilingual in our own setting. So with that, I want to thank Paulino again for this tremendous opportunity for us to express our thoughts and views. They are our own, obviously. There could be people who don't agree, but we do invite them to ask more questions even after if they watch the recordings. And I'm sure Paulino will send those down to us individually or as a group. It doesn't matter. We are open to discussion, and we are opening to improving the whole language industry as a whole. So with that, thank you very much to all the panelists for your time and your insights. I will pass this back to Paulino. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Tetsu, and thank you for putting together this wonderful panel here. Very, very interesting conversation. I want to remind our Language Learning Summit participants, we have more live sessions coming up, and I want to take this opportunity to let you know very quickly about them, because on Saturday, the 17th, February 17th, we have 3 live sessions. At 11 a.m. Central Standard Time, we have John D'Amato talking about evolving from editor to applied linguist, a professional odyssey. This is going to be a wonderful presentation for all kinds of teachers online or in the classroom. And following that, creative, collaborative, and communicative digital tools with Catherine Useling. If you want to learn more, not only what tools to use, but how to use them in a collaborative and communicative way. Catherine is your gal, and she was a candidate for the ACFL Language Teacher of the Year, so she has a lot of experience. And just to bring the creative arts, at 8 p.m. Central Time on Saturday, we have an interview with multilingual actor Big Bong, who produces wonderful videos in many languages. And on Sunday, we have our first panel, all in Spanish, la cultura en la clase de español como lengua extranjera. So it's going to be our first panel, all in Spanish. We have several for next week, but follow Language Learning Summit on our social media. Follow the hashtag LangSummit and just become part of this wonderful event. Thanks again to Tetsu and the panelists, and I hope to see you around as well. Take care.